Shalom everybody, welcome back to Jerusalem, welcome back to Zion. Great to be learning with you again this week. We are learning the Torah portion. This week's Torah portion is called Vayigash, and it begins with Judah approaching Joseph. Of course, Judah doesn't yet know that this is Joseph, his brother. This week's parasha, this week's Torah portion has special meaning for me. I want to explain to you. In 1988, when I was 13 years old, this week was my bar mitzvah parasha, the Torah portion for my bar mitzvah. The week in which you're born, you have a Torah portion just for you. So in 1988, I stood for the first time exactly on this Sabbath, on this Shabbat, and read from the Torah scroll for the very first time on behalf of the Jewish community in New Zealand, where I was living at that time and where I was raised. So this is a very emotional weekend for me. It's also very interesting because my Hebrew name, although my English name is Michael, my Hebrew name is Yosef, or Joseph, who is of course the star in this week's Torah portion and in a number of the portions that we've been reading in the last couple of weeks. And my father's name, in Judaism we're called to the Torah after our father. My father's Hebrew name is Yaakov, or Jacob. So by chance, I am named Joseph, son of Jacob, which is exactly the way it is in this week's parasha, and this week's Torah portion, as we're about to see that marvelous, emotional, tear-jerking reunion between Joseph and his father, who have not seen each other for so long. So let's delve straight into the parasha. In fact, we'll begin just at the end of last week's parasha, last week's Torah portion, which you'll recall was called Miketz, and we have a bit of a to-be continued moment, as if we're watching some kind of drama on Netflix. And we've always said that the Torah is a living document. It is. The Bible feels alive for us, and it is. And this is exactly the kind of thing we're seeing this week. If you look there at chapter 44, we're in the book of Genesis, chapter 44, verse 13, we see these words, V'yikra'u simlotam. The boys, the men, the brothers rent their garments. They're ripping their garments. It's a sign of mourning. Why? Because the goblet, which was placed as a test in Benjamin and his younger brother Benjamin's sack, it was found. And the boys are distraught. The second in place, the prime minister of Egypt, has just found, presumably, that Benjamin has stolen a goblet of the head of Egypt. So this is a crisis moment for the brothers, but it's a test by Joseph. And then, right there, Joseph challenges them, and he says to them, "What have you done? Ma ha'ma'aseh hazeh? What is this thing that you have done?" Joseph is testing his brothers. He wants to see that they're changed people, that this is not the same brothers who threw him in the pit and sold him on into Egypt. And what do we see straight away? If you look at verse 16, again, chapter 44, we see something remarkable. We see here, God has uncovered the sin of your servants. Straight away, Judah, who we see here coming of age, comes forth and says, no excuses. You've found us out. The facts are the facts. You've found the goblet. So right here, as we launch into this week's Torah portion, that was the ending of last week, we have a to-be continued tense moment. And the point of coming of age is very important in this week's parasha, in this week's Torah portion. And that's the theme I want us to concentrate on. Bar mitzvah, I told you about this week being the anniversary of my bar mitzvah. Bar mitzvah is all about coming of age for a young man, and a bat mitzvah for a young woman at the age of 12. It's about us taking on responsibility. It's about us taking on the mitzvot, the commandments. In Judaism, we believe we have 613 commandments to follow. So here in this week's parasha, in this week's Torah portion, we have a few people coming of age. Let's have a look in our new parasha, in our new Torah portion for this week, chapter 44, verse 18. What we see here is a very long speech, or a very long approach by Yehuda, or Judah, who approaches his younger brother Joseph, now a big man, a big leader in Egypt. Judah does not know that it is Joseph, and he approaches him with an emotional and a long speech that lasts, in fact, 16 verses. This is particularly long, perhaps one of the longer speeches in the 5 books of Moses. It's a long speech. It touches at a nerve. It speaks many, many times. Count them. Here's some homework for you. Count how many times Judah refers to my father, to Joseph's father. Joseph so much missing his father for so many years. And the mention so many times by Yehuda of his little brother Binyamin or Benjamin, the brother of Joseph who share a mother, Rachel or Rachel. These are emotional points for Joseph. Yehuda is asking for mercy. Yehuda is trying to convince this marvelous leader in Egypt to have mercy on his brothers, to take himself and not Benjamin as a slave. Joseph is taken by all this. And we see in chapter 45 a remarkable moment, perhaps one of the most emotional moments in the Bible. Joseph cannot take it anymore. And if you look at chapter 45, in that first verse, you see here, V'yikra, Hotziu kol ish me'alai. Send everyone out of the room, says Joseph suddenly. And he bursts into tears. This great king, this man who was testing his brothers to test if they had changed, who was being quite harsh with them, suddenly is in tears, and the screams, his weeping were heard across Egypt. Something's happened here. And what are the first words that he says? Perhaps some of the most famous words that Jewish people recall from the Bible. If you look at verse 3 of chapter 45, famous words. V'yomer Yosef elechav. Joseph says to his brothers, Ani Yosef, I am Joseph. Od avi chai? Is my father still alive? That's his first question. I'm alive. I'm Joseph, your brother. That's shocking enough, but is my father still alive? He has great love for his father. He misses him so deeply. He imagines what suffering his father has been through. And immediately, Joseph does an amazing thing. He sees the shock of his brothers, realizing that the Joseph they sold, or the Joseph that they believe they were responsible for his death, is now standing in front of them, and their future livelihood now rests in the man who they once sold, the man they once abandoned. What does Joseph do at verse 7 of chapter 45 straight away? And a number of times he says, my friends, my brothers, do not worry, do not be afraid. I will look after you, because it is God who sent me before you to make sure to prepare for you. God sent me ahead of you to ensure your survival in this land. He comforts them. What a remarkable thing. He has mercy on them. He sees that Judah has changed. He sees that Judah has taken responsibility. He sees that the brothers have done tshuva. They have repented. And this time, when they had a brother at risk, they stood with him. My friends, this week, the anniversary of my bar mitzvah, my coming of age at age 13, we see Judah come of age. We see Judah take responsibility as a man, as a family man, as someone who has responsibility to his father, not to cause any more pain and evil and harm to his father, and the brothers too. And we see, even though he's already the number 2 in the great Egypt, we see Joseph on an emotional and personal and on a family level also coming of age. He now becomes the leader of his older brothers. He now becomes the one upon which they are reliant for their future and their well-being. There is so much going on here. And as we've seen right through Genesis, the book of Genesis is the story of family. It's the story of personal growth. It's the stories of personal struggle. And we see it here again in this week's parasha. My friends, my message to you this week is that when we have a responsibility, when we have an opportunity to take responsibility for our brothers and for our sisters, let us take that opportunity through the work that we do in our communities, through the work that we do through philanthropy, by the giving, by the charity that we feel in our hearts. And when we put that charity and that philanthropy and that giving into action, when we do good deeds, we indeed can change the course of history. And we see that here in this week's parasha, in this week's Torah portion. Yehuda stands with his brother, and Joseph stands and will deliver for his brothers and for the future of his family. A remarkable story. I wish you from Jerusalem, from Zion, a Shabbat Shalom, a good Sabbath, peace upon us all, and safety for everyone. Shabbat Shalom.